My name is Gabriel Itkes-Sznap. I'm a poet, I'm a translator, and a literary critic. Throughout the next 20 minutes, I'll be posing some questions to these two gentlemen. The great Joshua Cohen, who just flew in from the United States a few days ago, and the equally great Jonas Hassen Khemiri, who also, I suppose, flew in from the United States not long ago. Joshua, you've written 11, I think, books, something like 11 books. You're not entirely sure yourself? No. Of which this you're sure of 6 are novels?
Yes.
Cool. Your last novel, The Netanyahus, enormously celebrated, awarded numerous times, among other things. It was given the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. It is the first of your books, which has been translated into Swedish by me, as so happens. Netanyahus. Jonas, you've written, I think, 7 novels, maybe. 7 novels. So Systrarna being the last, it just came out, had a spectacular, what's the word? Mottagande. It was very well reception. Thank you. Received. It was enormously well received. You've also written many plays, touring the world, and now you're here with us from the States. Okay, so what I want to do is I just want to talk about, or I want to make you guys talk about the things your books have in common, because at first sight it doesn't seem that way. Your book, Joshua, is a book about 2 academics. The rather hysterical meeting between 2 academics set in the late 50s, early 60s in the United States, telling that story. One of these academics is Benzion Netanyahu, the father of the current Prime Minister of Israel. Your book, Jonas, is a book about a guy or an author by the name of Jonas Hassen Khemiri in search of sort of himself, or trying to puzzle together life, looking back, trying to puzzle together a soul of sorts by means of going after 3 sisters who he may have or may not have had as neighbors when he was a kid in Stockholm. And it's set, in the 21st century mainly, late 1990s. So, from our first sight, different. But I think there are so many overlapping points. The first of these, I think, I would like to talk about, or have you talk about, is the notion, the experience of history, of being at the mercy of history, being subjected to historical forces, to put it a little bit abstractly, and wanting to take control of history, wanting to be the person who writes history. And your book even more, I think, explores just the notion of time, really, and how to tell a story of time. But I'll start with you, Joshua. How is is that true? Was that something you thought about, putting forth a statement on history or exploring that?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty abstract. Can people hear me? Good, because up here I can't hear myself, but that's usual for me, I can't write about something. I always want to write about something with that level of abstraction, but I can't. Yeah. Because I don't have that metaphysics of the soul. So I'm more interested in historians, right? And so both of these characters are historians in my book, and I especially like the idea of historians who are mediocre historians who teach at a kind of a small college in the middle of nowhere, and one of whom at least has or had, much larger, let's say, ambitions for his life, to purport to write history and then to walk around in a mediocre day-to-day, to have to wait in line at the supermarket, to have to get your car fixed, and yet to be the person who appoints themselves the arbiter of history, the writer of history, struck me as an inherently comic situation. And in fact, one very close to being a novelist, where being a novelist, you feel like, oh, I can control all of these characters, I can control this world, but, I can't, sew a button onto my shirt. Right? And so, the question that I wanted to really put out there is, when a historian is writing history about, a period by default that they haven't lived through, right? What are they missing in their own lives?
Right.
And to try and fill in and to use the historian as a stand-in for a people. As a people are living and writing and rewriting their history, meaning their deeper past, what present experience are they missing, and what is not being, codified of the present moment? And trying to do that really with the 1950s, which was a decade where all the Jews in the world were really busy becoming something else, and yet there was not, from at least a novelist standpoint, a lot of writing about it.
Okay, thank you. How about you, Jonas? I mean, you're just the structure of your book, the chapters. You have time, years, and it's all about like sort of some portions of the book are longer, some are shorter. Can you talk about that?
So, do you hear me? Okay, yeah. So, reading the Netanyahus, I saw a lot of similarities, like structurally they're very, very different. But this fascination with time and how time changes us seems to be an obsession in both of the books. The kind of structure that I played around with in my novel is that in previous works, I've kind of been obsessed with the idea of removing everything that is not needed and only keeping the essential. And with this book, I wanted to try a bigger format. So what I did is, the book is 700 pages, something like that. And the structure, it might sound a bit theoretical, but I wanted to see if I could capture what time feels like. Yeah. And my feeling is just that time is continuously speeding up.
Right.
So if I'm thinking of how time felt when I was 5 and we were going on like summer holiday, those 10 weeks felt like a year.
Yeah.
And then when I was in my 20s, I have this feeling that time was passing by quicker. Now I'm turning 45 this year. And the feeling is that this summer passed in like half an hour. The feeling is that time is going quicker. So the structure of the book is that the first section, it covers a year. Next section covers 6 months, then 3 months, then 1 month, then 1 week, then 1 day. So the goal, if this structure works, is that the reader gets a feeling of the experience of time.
Right.
And I also, there was something when you talked about personal history or kind of what the role that history plays in a book. I was also fascinated with how, there's an historian's view on, it covers 35 years of Swedish history. And a historian would never agree that the events in my book are kind of the most important events. That's not part of the official story. But I wanted to challenge that and kind of include, I guess, a number of symbols that were important in my life and in the sister's life, and turn it into kind of a personal version of Swedish history.
Right. Because your book is also so much a book about Stockholm. It's also a little bit a book about New York, to be honest, and a sort of testament to a love for New York, but also about Stockholm. And if you've grown up in Stockholm, there are many things, words that you're like, oh, I haven't thought about this for like 30 years, like the CD store, the Mega at Plattan, for example. Which was completely eradicated from my mind until I read it in the book. And basketball tournaments at Plattan. I played those basketball tournaments as well, and all these things that made up a time. And I think this is, I guess, the ambition of your book, and something I think similarly, although I'm not as, I mean, I grew up in Stockholm. I didn't grow up in the 50s in you know, the east coast of New York. It was still, we still have that sort of sense of bringing some kind of forlorn, forgotten, you know, atmosphere back.
Yeah.
Being in control of it.
Maybe. I mean, I think that I was trying to kind of give a portrait of a generation that was dying around me, you know, or maybe even kind of two generations. They kind of collapse into one another. Say the generation of roughly of Depression era children of immigrants in the United States, and who came into the 1950s with a sense of complacency and a sense that they had arrived at a point of successful assimilation into American life.
Right.
And, you know, I only knew those people at the end of their lives, right? And they struck me as the last generation to embody a certain American optimism, a certain American dream optimism. They were the last people that were able maybe to achieve the so-called American dream, right? And it was just fascinating to watch that generation as it passed.
Right.
Because, you know, not just to watch their, you know, certain confusions with regard to the cynicism and disconnection from mainstream political life of people of my generation, but also to kind of see where their cultural project went to. You know, these were people who all grew up speaking Yiddish and then left their roots in a lot of ways, had their careers, and then, you know, the moment that they reach what they would define for themselves as old age, suddenly they become old Jews again.
Right.
You know, and you know, as if like returning to, you know, the languages of their childhood just in preparation for their funerals. And so I felt from an American side that was very interesting, and then frankly from the Israeli side it was just very interesting to see, you know, the back history of the Netanyahu family, right, and why they ended up in the United States and how that influenced Bibi today. So on one hand I had, you know, Bibi Netanyahu in my head in the contemporary sense, and on the other hand, what I had in my head was, you know, a generation of the 1950s and their current disappearance.
I'm curious about, when reading it, I became curious how you dealt with the aspect of research. Because very rarely do I read a book and like it because it's well researched. I mean, facts rarely move me. When I moved to New York, one of the things that I did was I was there for like a library fellowship, and I was kind of surrounded by historians actually, and they would do a lot of research. And I realized that in order for details in a novel to be effective for me as a reader, they have to have a certain energy. And in reading your work, it was very clear to me that these details meant something because they were so important to the speaker in the novel. I'm curious about how you achieved that.
Yeah, I you know, thank you. I don't know. I mean, I think that the 1950s is just the 1950s United States is something that is so I don't want to say well documented, but well interpreted, right, in film and in television, right? Because you know, in the superficial sense of what could be seen as a superficial decade, it just looks great. The clothes look great, the cars look great, you know, and in a way, you know, you're supposed to read that the superficial detail as a symbol of internal hollowness or of an emptiness, right? Like all of the meaning inheres in the perfect pantsuit or the perfect Cadillac, because inside of these things, it's just this, you know, combustible rage and a sense of loneliness and isolation in the suburbs, right? And I think that coming at it from a book where, you know, where you, not only do you never want to compete with the screen, right? But in fact, like your job is to go beyond that surface, right? It then has to be about people's relationships with things, right? And so people aren't using the clutter of their lives anymore as decoys or distractions from their inner loneliness. They're clinging on to these objects because they give them meaning in a world that otherwise is bereft of it. And so, you know, in a lot of ways, I was thinking about, you know, what become the charms or the talismans of this period. And also, frankly, there's just a lot of literature that I was able to use and parody because I wanted to, you know, in a lot of ways, you know, not destroy, but yeah, maybe destroy a lot of the literature of that period, which bothered me.
Your book, Joshua, opens with a motto, eliminate the diaspora or let yourself be eliminated by it. It's a quote. As I understand, half of it is perhaps made up from a man called Jabotinsky, who was the founding father of so-called right-wing Zionism, what became the Likud party in Israel, which is Benjamin Netanyahu's current party. But this question, this conflict, this tension, rather painful, I think, between the elimination, the imperative of eliminating the diaspora or being eliminated by it, that is, you know, stop living as an exile or get eliminated by exile. I think that tension also is something that is very present in your book, Jonas. I mean, there are, in many of the characters, I think perhaps the father in this book, he's ravaged. I mean, that's a bit powerful, but I mean, he's haunted by this sort of this historical fact that he's been like he's thrown out, and what is he doing like in life existentially, and he's living in Sweden, and then all of a sudden he's living in Tunisia, where he comes from, and then, you know, he has kids who inherits this extreme tension. Do you want to say something about the diaspora, and then back to you, Joshua, because we started.
Yeah, well, when I wrote the book, one of the things that I wanted to explore was this kind of the pain of when we realize that we have a lot of dreams, and then when these dreams end up in conflict with reality. And the father in the book, you're right, like one of the things that he does is that he comes to Sweden with like a lot of dreams.
Yeah.
And it's, I mean, my dad did that as well. Like he was kind of obsessed with money and kind of obsessed with making it here. And then he had this idea that he wanted us to create like, I guess the English word is like consortium. In Swedish it's called Khemiri. My name is Khemiri. Khemiri Koncernen. Like we would build the Khemiri Consortium, you know, like an LLC. Like, but in reality, what we did was, you know, we were kind of selling fake watches and selling fake perfumes and like, you know, cleaning restaurants. But he still had this huge dream that one day everything will be different.
Right.
And for a while, I think it was possible to kind of cling on again with the time. For certain, like the first year, 5th year, 10th year, he still could kind of, you know, separate daily life from dream. One day things will be different. But I think a shift came when he was kind of, I guess in my age, when he kind of realized that I will never be able to kind of achieve what I came here to do. So then he tried to compensate for the, I guess, loss of his dream. And one of the things he did was like he tried to build a house in Tunisia, a bunch of projects that never really amounted into anything. But in the book, I wanted to kind of write about different kinds of dreams. So he's dreaming about making it here, whatever that means. The sisters in the book, they grew up with a mythology, a myth, that they were actually kind of, their mother's version is that they are cursed. So they had to escape a curse that basically says that if you fall in love with something, if you love something too much, it will be taken away from you. And the father's version of that, or I guess a mythology that tries to challenge to the mother's mythology, is that he has at some point, maybe jokingly, told them that they are related to one of the men who is depicted in, you know, this famous photo, lunch atop a skyscraper. Right. Basically, that's their grandfather, great-grandfather. I think on some level, they know that both of these stories are kind of, you know how it is with family mythologies. We kind of believe them, but then we don't. But if you're actually convinced by a story and you think that you might be cursed, it's very easy to see signs of that everywhere. I did an interview the other day, just before leaving. I was at Center for Fiction in Brooklyn, and there was a photographer who kind of said he wanted to take a photo of me in the bookstore, and they have like this big staircase, in the bookstore. And he just said, yeah, this is great, but why don't you just stand underneath the ladder so I can take a photo of you there? And this superstitious thing that if you stand underneath the ladder, I don't know what happens. Your plane crashes on the way to Gothenburg, or something very bad would happen. But I know theoretically that that's not true. And I was kind of like, yeah, maybe if I stand close to the ladder, I'm not going, of course I didn't go under the ladder. And there's no part of me that actually believes that I would be dead within 24 hours had I stood under that ladder. But it's just interesting with those stories that we don't believe, but they're so easy to start to make, to grab a hold of us once we see signs of them. And I've spent my whole life living in different mythologies, I guess. So one of the things I wanted to do in this book was to try to see if it's possible to write myself out of a few of these mythologies. I actually spoke to a friend of mine in the United States who told me, we talked about mythologies and stories and the difference. And he said, for me, a mythology is a story that you can't get out of. And I thought that was fascinating, that there's something about a mythology that makes it really hard to break free from, I guess.
Yeah, mythology is like the mafia, you don't get out alive. I don't know. I mean, you were asking about the Jabotinsky quote. We're out of time.
You can finish the question.
I think that for me that quote, I'll just is about this idea of influence, right? Where you can almost drop the word diaspora from it, and it's like eliminate X, or X will eliminate you. Yeah. And it's the way that I think in avant-garde thought about in artistic inheritance. It's and it's a way that unhealthily I think young writers try to deal with the enormous past, and what does it mean to write something at the end of this huge chain of tradition. And I think that there's this belief in purity and a belief in originality and purity that over time, as a writer and just as a person, you have to lose faith in, right? And you have to understand that the idea of your singularity and your purity are fictions, and you have to begin celebrating your own motley mess. And in a way that I think inheres in a writer's life is precisely the opposite of the way it tends to happen in political tribalisms and groups, where they actually try to become more essentialist and more pure and asserting their own role in an identity climate within a democracy. And so I kind of wanted to write about how do you kind of mature and grow up as a writer in a society that's becoming progressively less mature and more primitive. On that happy note,
yeah, exactly.
Enjoy.
We finish with the primitive. Please read and buy Joshua's and Jonas's books. They're here, I hope. Yeah, thank you so much, Joshua Cohen.
Thank you,
Jonas Hassen Khemiri.